Hi, everyone. Welcome to a brand new season of AI Talks. If you're not familiar with AI Talks, let me bring you up to speed. AI Talks are a series of talks and conversations where we're trying to bridge the gap between the people who know about the space of AI versus the people who are just starting the journey. Our goal is to make AI simple and accessible for everyone. And the theme for this season is the role of AI in decision making for businesses of all sizes, from small, medium, or large enterprises, really looking to empower citizen data science. Also, we're going to mix up the format for the season a little bit. I'm going to be hosting a series of roundtable discussions with experienced practitioners and leaders in the space of business, innovation, analytics, and data science. And the conversations will focus on business culture, mindset, leadership, strategy, all around the adoption of AI and analytics and decision making within enterprises. So don't worry. There's no math, no calculus, no algebra you have to do. We're just going to focus more on the high level strategy parts of it. Also, along the way, we're going to try and dispel myths and misconceptions around AI. We're going to draw upon the expertise and experience of people who've not only used AI, but built products, services, teams, and organizations over the years. And helping me along this journey is my good friend, Gib Bassett, co hosting the AI Talks with me. Gib is a seasoned analytics expert with a strong experience and background in industrial, retail, and manufacturing. He has deep experience witnessing some of the pivotal moments in the analytics space. For example, at SPSS, he saw the emergence of predictive analytics and then the rise of Hadoop during the time at Teradata. When AI began to capture the attention of enterprise tech companies in the late 2010s, Gib was deeply involved with the cloud and big data initiatives at Oracle when we first met. He's also worked at companies like Salesforce and recently Alteryx. And across all the various roles he has held, one thing has been consistent: his focus on driving business value. And so the reason why I invited Gib to host AI Talks with me is to really tap into his experience, particularly around the business framing and perspective, and the value AI and analytics can bring to any organization. Welcome to AI Talks, Gib.
Thanks, Avi. It's great to be here with you, and I really appreciate it. This should be really fun.
Absolutely, mate. It's just like old time steaks.
Exactly.
Let's get started. We all understand the role of good decision making in an organization, right? A good decision can make a business, it could also break a business. And that's why leaders very often spend a lot of their time looking at understanding the situation and making good decisions that impact their customers, their employees, and shareholders. Gib, talk through your experience and what are the types of decisions that executives and leaderships typically really focus on and need help with.
Right. It's a really interesting question. So, just even that term decisions, and your question is specific to leadership, there typically are strategic decisions that they're focusing on in terms of what markets they should be going after or how they should be, pricing and who they should be partnering with at a strategic level. And so there's decisions in that space. But more broadly than that, I worked for Bear Isaac, FICO. Decision management was a thing. And we had a thought leader there named James Taylor. And he would often talk extensively on this subject. And he would talk about, there are literally some organizations, thousands, if not millions of decisions that happen in organizations daily. Very small decisions, but a lot of them happening. And they all need to be orchestrated, measured, et cetera, and optimized. And there's technology and there's analytics behind those things. And that's different, though, than sort of the decisions that a single individual makes or a team of people make based upon analytics, insights, reports, dashboards, and the like. And so more, broadly, you've got operational kind of decisions that occur, either in terms of the things I just described, like an insurance company processing a claim versus someone looking at a sales report and assessing, what's happening in the current quarter and, what you want to do to make your number and the like. But I think even more broadly than this, just in terms of analytics, and of course the AI Talks is the subject matter here, having been in this space a long time, it's just very interesting how the industry and the skill sets and the professionals like yourself, evolve and advance and do really amazing things like you had done at Amazon and at Oracle and at Track and Wireless and now at Berryjam. But meanwhile, a lot of organizations struggle to really improve with decision making and using analytics and data to inform that. And this is just sort of a very long-standing challenge. And I think the consensus has been that it hasn't been really a technical problem as much as it's been an organizational and cultural problem. So, New Wave Partners, this organization that Tom Davenport and Randy Bean had founded, worked together to publish an annual CDO survey. Every year, the results incrementally change, but it's always coming back to culture and organizational design and the way people are managed and incentivized and the like, that determines whether a company feels as though they are data driven and getting value from that. And so there are a lot of companies doing really amazing things, and everyone's trying to improve. And of course, there are technology companies rushing to fill the void, waving their hands furiously, saying, "Look at me, I have the solution. Just buy this thing, and it's going to be amazing." And of course, that never works, as people, unfortunately, that don't know have to go through that pain and understanding that. But having said that, there are people like yourself who have been working in this space a long time, who see kind of like, okay, I see what's happening here. I think I kind of understand what the adoption problems are. And, there are companies on the bleeding edge, market leaders and digital natives that are doing really interesting stuff. It's said that there's only 50 people that are really super expert in generative AI globally. And that brain trust of those people are worth their weight in, plutonium or whatever the most expensive, mineral is or whatever. And so, and they're doing some really interesting work, in this space to figure out sort of like, how do I help organizations, no matter their maturity, participate in this? Because the reality of it is that, most people would say that I struggle just to get a report on what's happening in my business and be confident in the numbers. And when you have that is sort of the state of play in your company, it's sort of hard to have a conversation about doing a generative AI chatbot that's going to talk to your customers and resolve customer cases so that you can cut your, customer support staff or however you manage it by 20 or 30% or something like that. It's like, let alone that, it's sort of this, but it's all coming back sort of to data as a foundation and having good data. But at the same time, the speed of business is such that, especially in supply chain, which I've been very recently familiar with, is such that very few organizations have time to step back and think strategically about this stuff. And so you step back even further than when we started here. And it's sort of like companies struggle with this notion of, how do I make progress? How do I advance when I feel as though I can't? But I need to, because either my board is pressuring me, our investors are pressuring me, or our competition is pressuring us because our market share, we're losing customers as a consequence. We're a private company, that they're doing some interesting things in the space. So how do I improve? And so I think the state of play in data and analytics, which I often view as very different than the application space. So when I say application space into technology context, I'm talking about companies like Salesforce, where I used to work, or Workday, ServiceNow, SAP, Oracle. Certain components of it sell applications. These are business applications designed for people around certain processes. Analytics is more of a discipline, a professional discipline that gets applied to different functions. I think that there's an opportunity to figure out how you can help companies make those improvements in spite of the fact that they may not have some of the fundamentals handled, and that's okay. The question is, how would you actually do that with confidence in a way that you'd be willing to stand behind it? Because that's the other dimension here too, that kind of comes back to the cultural and leadership pieces, that people need air cover, sponsorship, and permission to experiment, which I know you talk a great deal about experimentation. And I remember coming into that, idea in 2016 or 17, when we worked at Oracle, and experimentation was a big part of data science. And I remember, and even to this day, there are Harvard Business Review articles and MIT press articles and others that talk about data science teams when they hit the mark, they've done really well. And when they don't, they've made assumptions. They haven't really understood the problem very well. They haven't gotten engaged in the right vein. And so that lesson there is that from back then is that, the data science teams have to be much more aligned with the business and in step with them. But, as you have often pointed out, not every organization has a data science team. And if they do, they may not be necessarily aligned to the business. And so when you step back again further, you see organizations in terms of their resources, the human beings that they have that do analytics work. You've got business analysts that may identify not as analytics professionals, but more as business people. That I'm a demand planner, or I'm a marketing digital marketer or something like that. I do that as a consequence of my job. And this kind of gets into kind of what you're talking about in terms of the citizen developer, the citizen data science, the individual who does this work, but yet no one has that as their title. No one has a business card or a LinkedIn profile that says, I'm Gib Bassett, I'm a citizen data scientist. I may do citizen data science work, but my real day job is to, sell, cellular phone plans or whatever the case might be.
There's so much in there, Gib. Let's try to unpack it a little bit, because we talked a little about, you talked a few things here. One is the organization side of it, the culture. the kind of decisions people have to make might be micro and day to day, or
Yep.
very, very macro strategic, which could basically transform the organization. And analytics always played a role in that, right? It's always been supported, because I remember in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s, one of the biggest mantra was data driven decision making. All the executives and leadership were going through training and looking at how do they actually move away from the gut feel sort of decision making to actually grounded in evidence and support.
Mhm.
And the analytics support, and that's where we saw a lot of the rise of the Hadoop in the AI space, right? Hadoop and big data analytics was precursor to essentially where we are at. We're trying to say go further than just what fits on an Excel file. Go to the little signals and bring them all together. Let's talk about, where do you see organizations really stumbling to go and make a informed data driven decision?
It brings to mind an immediate thought. So back in early 2010s, Procter and Gamble, biggest most successful, best known CPG company in the world, many leading brands, etc.
Mhm.
And they had this very much this challenge where they would bring in the division presidents, the division heads into a single space to talk about performance, market share numbers, etc. And of course, everyone had brought to the meeting different numbers and debated often in the meetings about what numbers actually were right, and so
Mhm.
this became a big initiative, and it yielded something they called Business Sphere, and it was a very cool thing. Anyone can Google it. And while you may look at that today and say, well, of course, every business should have something like that, or does, the single pane of glass, the overall view, consistent view of their business. And so for them, though, they couldn't do anything really innovative until they understood that and had a consistent understanding and agreed upon understanding of what was happening consistently across their business. So I think the state of play for many organizations today is still a lot like that. And it's compounded by the fact that, again, as I said earlier, that companies feel this need to continue to incrementally improve. And so
Mhm.
we need a CDP, a customer data platform. Well, we have a data warehouse. Well, but this is different. This is for marketing. Oh, okay. So give me one of them, and let's dump all our customer data in there. Oh, well, and then that's off and running. And then we need to replace our legacy, customer support system with Salesforce or some other, service application. Oh, go do that. And then it creates. This happens consistently, and then integration happens on demand as required, and it yields opportunities to sell these organizations services and software to help them do that. Over time, they're building an architecture for their business that may work, and it may be expensive and difficult to do, but fundamentally they're still creating huge pockets of data and issues and problems that then kind of have them coming back full circle and talking to the Snowflakes and the Databrickses of the world, and Teradatas that specialize in the single view of the data across the enterprise to fuel things forward. But it was funny about that is that's like a cyclical thing, because this has consistently been, like you said, data-driven decision making since 2010s or early 2000s. This is what companies are often saying.
Mhm.
And I personally believe that I think it has a lot to do with the fact that just analytics is just not a well thought out business function in a lot of organizations, except for companies like Procter and Gamble. I often cite them because I got very familiar with that company when I worked at Teradata. But the way that they had organized IT and data science and analytics and focusing on what they would call wicked problems, and they had the right people doing that work there, because of course they could afford it. That obviously gives them an advantage, right? And so
Mhm.
that immediately brings to mind, this idea that data scientists are scarce. It was talked about as the sexiest job of the 21st century by Tom Davenport and others, and it really still is. And as the shine off of it a little bit, well, I think actually it's probably going to come back to it, because what generative AI is doing initially was creating this sort of excitement, and then a little disillusionment about sort of, how do I actually do this, and who can help me really confidently navigate what's going on here? I need somebody who knows math, statistics, understands what a large language model is, how it goes into it, understands cloud computing and what that all means, and GPU resources, all these different technology terms that get dumped in this bucket of stuff for generative AI that no one has ever heard of except for the past 24 months. They need skilled people who can really interpret that stuff, and they need them to help them figure out how to make competent steps. And those same exact people, though, they're often not really
Just
they
on
haven't
that,
they haven't got
I'm
the
going to,
fundamentals yet done.
yeah, sorry, I'm going to just pick on something you just said here. Like, the underlying theme seems to be, irrespective of what technology, whether it was dashboards or BI, or whether it was analytics, or whether it was big data, or even generative AI, irrespective of any of the technology pieces, the fundamental thing that I think you and I, we've seen again and again, is there's a sort of a fundamental gap in how organizations think about data and decisions and insights. And really, the gap is often around the technology versus the talent that exists in an organization, right? As you said, like you need to have these highly specialized skill sets to understand and wield these technology pieces. And we see that again and again, right? If you look at every organization that I've worked at, the common thread I see is there's generally more business savvy people as opposed to programmers and technical and
Right.
statisticians and scientists in any organization. And yet, the real tools to go down into sound support decision making tend to be the things that people have to code or build or have technical expertise in. And so there's always a hey, I have a huge demand and backlog of analytics questions, right? We saw this at TrackPhone where I was head of data science. The challenge was there's always new reports coming, requests coming, analysis coming, but the team is very, very small. And so one of that talent and technology gap is pretty massive. What do you think? Is that your experience?
Oh, absolutely. So, and I shared this one of these examples with you earlier when we've spoken, but and at one of these analytics conferences that I attended in Chicago, there was a speaker from Walmart Labs there who spoke about his challenge. I believe his name was Esteban Archuate. I think he works at Meta now. He's an AI leader, smart guy just like yourself, data scientist by trade, similar age as us probably. And he said, my biggest challenge at Walmart Labs is that we don't have enough data-driven managers. We got enough of the skills on the data science side, but we need more people to participate with us in this process of this data-driven journey. This was 4 or 5 years ago, and obviously he's moved on to different things. But I just saw something on LinkedIn recently. Bill Groves, who was the former CDO at Walmart, is now doing a sort of like a LinkedIn podcast of his own, talking about the CDO role and the like. And I think his inaugural episode, if I recall the note that I'd seen on LinkedIn, he talked about CDOs are kind of lone wolves, and they don't often report to the right person and not at the right level. And it just brought to mind a post that I'd written on Medium arguing for that, just like finance, marketing, operations, HR are functions in businesses that go back to a business model design, data and analytics almost needs to be that way, because what it needs is it needs more resources. It needs to be treated as that. And what many organizations do will hire a smart person and say, you're our CDO. But analytic resources are all over the company. They're not going to report to you. They're not even going to be dotted line to you, but you're going to do amazing things for us. That's got to be a lonely spot to be in for a lot of these leaders, I would assume, because you want to impress and do amazing things. And maybe you do have a small team or whatever, just like you were describing, but you don't have purview or oversight of all that's happening. And there are exceptions, of course, but I think that that's largely, very, very true. So I do think that the data-driven manager piece of it, could be a consequence of taking it much more seriously. But just like everything, these companies are moving so fast, and, business model design is something hard, and companies that take it seriously. Like, if you think about Jack Welch, General Electric, and you think about Procter & Gamble, you think about the companies that are the case studies in business school about how you take this stuff really seriously. You're not half-assing it. You really are taking it seriously. They may not do what I just described, but they kind of do things that are, that look like that when you work there, or you see how it works. But that's exceptional, right? That's the top bit of the pyramid. Now, with generative AI and what analytics and decision making, how these things are going to intersect now, is that it's possible that the accelerator is going to hit. And companies that can afford to really do amazing and interesting things, they're going to reduce their costs massively, and they're going to do some really innovative things. And other companies are going to be like, their jaws will be dropping when they see these results and they see these articles, like, holy cow, they've been able to reduce the investment over here, increase it here, and get results here. How do we do that? And they look back internally, and it's just a mess of IT architecture and poor organizational design and leadership suite that's kind of churning a lot. And it's really, really, really hard. So technology can play a role in this whole mix to help these companies improve, but it is going to take smarter people that kind of can really see through a lot of the hype and hire and work with trusted individuals who really understand this stuff, like yourself.
Yeah. Well, the challenge I see though is you're going to get new tools coming constantly, but the fundamentals don't shift. And the fundamental problem with an organization comes down to the culture of organization around this. As you said, like, you just appoint somebody and give them a title CDO and don't have any influence or power or budget to work with. It's really limits them. So the challenges we've seen again and again is beyond the talent, beyond the technology, beyond the even the resources or financial capital that you can allocate. There's also a very, very big element of culture. And I'm really worried, though. You brought up generative AI and Gen AI as tool sets. The risk there is pretty profound. And while people are getting excited about generative AI and lots of different uses, Gen AI kind of doesn't do well with really, really structured analysis, which is evidence based. It's very much a statistical or text generation or visual or art or music or video generation. So we've been using Gen AI as components within our tool set and what we build, but we don't use it for analytics because it has the potential for hallucination. It has the potential of getting things wrong. And if if I'm running a business, I don't want to drive decisions based on a hallucination of a generative AI system, right? And so this is the part where I see a lot of organization get really excited about hype and then get lost in the mess, because AI isn't just one tiny thing that just happens to be in the media these days. AI has been a field of technology pieces, techniques and strategies and algorithms since the 1950s, right? And so when everybody talks about AI, they're looking at it from their particular lens based on what they know, and that's fair. But all of Gen AI isn't the only AI. In fact, there was some interesting study done where McKinsey looked at was 17 to 20 odd $1 trillion impact of AI on the economy, and about 8 to 11 trillion was non-Gen AI stuff. So a
Right.
larger chunk of it is non-Gen AI
Yeah.
on the economy.
I mean, it makes sense. And we spoke once, and I think that this still happens where on LinkedIn or a website for news for your specific industry or the type of person that you are in terms of your job, you'll see articles by thought leaders saying, "Oh, generative AI. Here are applications of generative AI for marketing, for supply chain." And unfortunately, I've read many of these that, as you just described, talk about applying generative AI to what are otherwise more straightforward use cases that should be addressed by these organizations using more traditional methods that they should already have expertise in, but don't. And the danger here is that they get confused, and that's the worst possible thing. So yeah, we are at a point, I think, where advice is cheap. Everybody's given it. Everybody wants to be recognized as an expert in this space because that's where attention gets pointed. People believe that companies are spending money in this space, and you want to be first in line to collect it. So you better talk about it. But to your point about quantitative analysis and generative AI and hallucination and the like, yes, I mean, I think that's definitely an issue. The way you built it into Berry Jam to really provide sort of the natural language sort of responses and framing sort of the way that the application speaks to your more casual user, the non-data scientist. I think that is brilliant. To your point, the danger is when that gets applied to show me the give me the code, give me the data model for this application, and then few people will deploy it into production based upon that, but they're going to use it as the basis. And so again, if it works after you've tweaked it, that's cool. But I mean, how do you know how it was even constructed? What were its assumptions? Is it safe? Is it going to break? Is it scalable? It's been documented, whatever the case might be. Is it violating some sort of principle of development that we've embodied this to the citizen developer, topic that we're talking about here, the individual who actually will build stuff, analytics in this context, versus not, that's where the danger comes in. So, it's a means to an end, but it should, generative AI should probably be considered part of the toolkit to get stuff done. But it's not going to be, it's not a panacea for a lot of these problems. But again, this is going to be a challenge. So whoever's watching this now, if you have authority or you're going to have a job where you're evaluating these things, absolutely keep this in mind, because you're going to get too excited by seeing demos and talking to technology vendors and consulting firms that promise to do amazing things for your business. You got to watch that with a very, very careful eye, because as I've said, I think to you and some others, that the forthcoming articles that we're going to see about the companies that do amazing things, that will happen, of course, but then we're also going to see articles about companies that are making mistakes, where hallucinations and other issues and challenges and mistakes that these systems are making are costing companies big time. And I think we're at a critical stage right now where a lot of that stuff's going to happen. And you absolutely know that Meta and OpenAI and the others, we're the 50 to 100 people that know this stuff intimately. They know exactly what this stuff looks like and know what's going on and how this is all going to play out. And they probably have huge confidence that the next version of whatever they produce is going to be mind blowing, only increasing this excitement, but then also this fear that, oh my God, look at this. This is amazing. Imagine I could apply this to my auto parts business or my,
Mhm.
my online retailer that sells clothing to people. Like, oh my God, I can do amazing things. I want to do amazing things. And so, to your point earlier, and often about experimentation, it's sort of like, citizen developers and data scientists and experimentation, culture, leadership, these things have to kind of coalesce together in like a perfect mix. And it's not a bad idea to look at leaders in your segment who are doing this really well, and not necessarily say I have to invest that kind of money to do it, but look at what they're doing organizationally and try to model that a little bit. I mean, when I worked at Teradata, we often talked about Procter and Gamble as a lighthouse example of some of the things that we're doing in the consumer space. Every company that we talked to in the CPG space, whether it was Clorox or others, they always wanted to know the details of that stuff. And of course, the technology details were pretty much proprietary, and everyone was under NDA, so you couldn't discuss it at the time. But because Procter and Gamble is Procter and Gamble, plenty of people are out in the front lines talking about what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the like. And it's individuals, right? And again, so it's really interesting, right? So I don't know if it's because the cream rises to the top, the best, most talented, and the smartest managers work for the biggest companies, and maybe the B, C, and D players that get populate the rest of the world. But the rest of the world often is looking at the technology as the solution, and saying, I want to do what they're doing. So tell me what they're doing technically. It's like you're not looking at this through the right frame. You should look backward in your company and say, could you even conceive of doing something like this because of how they actually got to that point? And chances are probably not. And the person saying that probably has no authority to do anything either, potentially, and maybe not be the right person to be even asking those questions, which also indicates that the company, despite what they could say about being data driven or analytics driven or whatnot, simply isn't true. So
The other part of the Gib, just on that particular thing, is like every organization has its own priorities and needs to chart its own course. You can't be a small company or medium-sized company and try to bring in the processes and systems of P&G, right? They're very, very different. A small and medium-sized company or retailer shouldn't, while it might aspire for the results and the benefits of technology and decision making and AI that matches Amazon, it cannot support that. So it has to think differently. So you can't just copy paste. You have to think and work backwards. So if I'm an organization which has to support the leadership and decision making based on my particular conditions, I need solutions that are tailored for that rather than P&G, Amazon, Microsoft stories, right?
absolutely,
They're,
right.
they're good for inspirations, good for ideas, but it
Mhm.
has to be personalized. And I think that's where a lot of the journeys I've seen people come in and they've like, hey, we're going to be the next Amazon and we're going to be the next Google. And then they try to copy and paste those things. It wouldn't work. Um,
I don't mean to interrupt you, but it brings to mind an example. So my experience at Salesforce, I wouldn't call it a traumatizing career experience, but working in customer success can be traumatizing as a professional person. And so one of the customers that I won't name, a retailer, definitely not the largest in the world, a lot of their leadership had swapped out and had been replaced by former Sam's Club, Walmart people, including the head of technology. And Walmart has they want to invent their own stuff. They want to create their own things. This individual had that definite that perspective. They were a large Salesforce customer, and he basically wanted all the applications gone, wants to redo everything. Well, then what occurred is a huge exit of people, basically, that I had been working with for a long time there, aligned to these different business process applications for service, marketing, and commerce. And it certainly isn't helpful, right? So to your point, it's sort of like it's hard to take somebody whose mindset is, I'm going to take my ginormous company resources and apply it to this company that has none. It can be a big mistake. And I haven't checked in on that retailer lately, but I haven't seen them in the headlines lately. But that's definitely an issue that has to be addressed. Nothing wrong with hiring those executives from those big companies, because some of them are excellent.
They bring experience and possibilities, but it has
Yeah.
to be tailored for that organization, right? And really comes down to the organization's existing talent pool, right? What is it? Because you can go and hire data scientists and data engineers and analysts, but then you have to train them about your business. You have to bring in that domain knowledge, and that's the other part, right? A lot of the organizations they believe that just like finance can operate in isolation, or that IT can operate in isolation, that data in driven decision making can operate in isolation, but it can't. And this is one of the biggest challenges businesses have. Like, they go for a centralized IT department or analytics department, and this becomes essentially an ivory tower where they're so far away from where the rubber hits the road that they can't actually drive good decision. I was talking to somebody recently. They work for a large biotech company, and we asked them, do you have a data science team? And go, yeah, somewhere in some other part of the world. I go, what do you mean, do you work with them? "Oh, I don't know, they're doing something on their own, we never see them." And this is the person who's working in research and inventing new drugs, and where data driven decision making could be fundamental. But the fact that even really well funded organizations struggle with creating and essentially create these divides of ecosystems or capabilities means that the investments in AI and data science and analytics is actually not being realized as well as they can be. Um, so there's always this sort of contrast between the centralized versus the decentralized model. Now, decentralized, as you said, is also risky because you have disparate teams doing their own thing without a shared vision. So there's often a common a pull and push sort of a mechanism here.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a name dropping kind of individual, but I've been saying people's names here because these are tied to the examples that I often think about. So Katya Walsh, I think now she works for the government in some sort of very senior sort of analytics AI leadership capacity, but she used to be the chief data or analytics officer at Vodafone, so in a similar space to sort of TrackPhone. Then she became chief AI officer at Levi's several years ago, and that was the first time I'd seen someone with that title, which is very interesting, right? So I thought that was very curious and interesting. So I kind of followed her and connected with her on LinkedIn. And subsequent to her joining Levi's, you would see things in the press about, I was wondering, so Vodafone, I don't know anything about Vodafone's analytics functions, but as a company in that space, you have to imagine that they're collecting and very data-driven business, I would imagine. So Levi's makes jeans, maybe, certainly there's opportunities for that as a manufacturer of clothing and a direct seller and retailer of clothing. But she implemented programs and clearly, is very smart, because I don't know who at Levi's is connecting her into the press, but like, you'd read articles in various, retail technology publications about how, Katya Walsh, she's doing internal training on how to teach managers about applications for machine learning and AI. Never been done there before. Good idea, and citing specific numbers of people that they're upskilling. And so it's as if you could, if you could be a fly on the wall when this was being conceived, you might imagine that, she understood that she has to bring these people along and she has to create these forms. And so there's an example of the leadership really being very important, being empowered to do things, being allowed to talk publicly about it, not being, locked down. Like, I don't want you talking to anybody outside the company about what we're doing here, letting her have sort of as much free reign as it appears to be to do that kind of stuff. I think that is definitely kind of a very interesting way of seeing an example of, I see, that was really necessary, because before you can even recruit people, they have to understand what this even represents. And you have to bring people who think they know what it means, people maybe that do data analysis on a daily basis, if they're, financial analysts, or maybe they work in the supply chain or marketing. They're using all sorts of tools and, spreadsheets and whatnot to do reporting and customer segmentations and the like, and they think they understand what they're doing. And then they kind of come into this environment here, and it opens up their eyes, and they, they get excited, and it helps develop the data-driven culture that companies really want. So it's a very specific tactic, and it's just one article, and there are probably others that you can Google that relate to things like that she was doing there. But it illustrates that a program of education and skilling, and 7-Eleven, I think, is another example that I recall from Salesforce. They would do very similar things. They were a Databricks customer, and Databricks would do things like this with them internally with their data science teams, to do hackathons, do all sorts of things. Again, very tactical meetings and lunch and learns and the like, but that stuff is really important for an executive to make sure that happens. And you measure it, and you graduate people through that program, you maintain some currency. That stuff's got to happen. And clearly it was an idea that she brought from Vodafone, where it's been sort of fundamental to a lot of what they do. I don't have any idea, but it's clear that that's definitely necessary, because otherwise you're not going to get the people that you need, working with you to help realize this stuff. And I think that's probably where, it's the job tenure of a chief data officer is, a couple of years, or it varies a bit, but it's often talked about as a high churn job where people kind of come in and out of it. I mean, it could largely be because of this, right? Where they say like, I'm an introvert, and but I'm a smart person, and I'm a data person, and I come into a company, but I have to be extroverted because I have to immediately jump in and grab everybody by the collar and say, "This is a huge opportunity. I'm excited to teach it to you." It's like, if that's not your attitude orientation, you might want to take a class to understand how to be that way, because it's probably helpful to get people to sort of change their perspectives, especially in companies that don't have as much resources as the market leaders and the like. People are very busy and maybe working on the weekends or working late. It's got to represents an opportunity to improve themselves even professionally. And that
training is important, especially for leaders. I mean, we are always looking to learn and grow and improve, right? If you stop learning, you stop growing. You stop growing, you miss out on opportunities and ideas, right? And in this space, no one actually learns a little bit as much about analytics or decision making or even machine learning and AI at all in the business side. They hear about it, and a lot of the psychology is often very much about, it's IT's job. No, it's to really adopt AI as a organization, you need to have your business teams very, very comfortable. They shouldn't be writing code. They need to don't know the math behind it or the algorithms behind it. What they need is function. What are the capabilities? I know we're going to talk about in one of the coming up episodes as well around how to formulate this problem. But talent, training that talent is important, and then picking the right tools based on the needs of the business and the capabilities of the talent is super important. Organizational structure, whether it's decentralized or centralized or some hybrid of it. But more importantly, around how the mindset around these things have to happen, because there's mindset around, I need evidence to make a decision, so I need that evidence to be solid from data or we have gathered internally, externally, whatever. Versus I also need the mindset of exploration, constant exploration with experimentation and testing out ideas. And sometimes these are hard things for businesses to reconcile. On one side, I want surety, and the other side, you're expecting me it to be just an experiment.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Oh,
You
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, my recent experience, and we've talked a little bit about this before, is that business analysts populate every organization to some degree. Some companies have thousands of them, some of them have dozens, but these are folks that identify more as business people aligned to supporting their business. And they are doing data analysis on a daily basis, generating reports, gluing things together and helping people understand what's going on. They don't work in IT, they don't work in data science. And they're a part data science, and maybe data science lives off in its own thing, if it even exists at all. Or experimentation is sort of like a tiger team of the best resources from different parts of the company that may be looking at a generative AI pilot project. And the people that have the greatest familiarity with the business and the data that it generates are probably the analysts and those that are in the trenches on a day-to-day basis. And yet my experience suggests that these folks are often not part of those sort of initial pilots to explore generative AI pilots to build an interesting chatbot that is, adapting and responding in unique and interesting ways. They're just not pulled into those conversations for a variety of reasons. I mean, who knows if they're even understood to be potential experts that can be pulled into there. But it kind of illustrates this point that, companies have these disparate resources that don't necessarily communicate or talk to each other, yet they all identify as data and analytics professionals that are doing work. And so in that instance that I just described, if a company is like that, then again, why is that the case? Well, it's leadership, and it's how the organization is incentivized. And these analysts are not told to do that, or they're not understood to be able to support that. And these folks don't know who they are. And, somebody should understand that they are both related, and they should both probably, be working together to collaborate on these things and accelerate. That's one of those learnings that I think is going to surface here, is that, boy, our pilots failed. And it's because we didn't talk to the people that were closest to the process and the function, or we talked to the wrong people. We talked to sort of the person on the front line. They said this is that and the other thing, but we didn't talk to the people that are actually helping develop and understand what's going on from a data and analytics perspective, because we just thought, well, who are those guys? Those are just business analysts. They're not PhDs in statistics and mathematics. We don't need to talk to them. But our pilot failed. But now we realize we should have probably talked to those data people, because they're really close to it. So and those are the individuals who probably be excited to learn this stuff and actually have some air cover to have the time to do it, because they're probably very stressed out and very busy. And my experience, a lot of those folks, it can be a lonely existence, because you are sort of sit in two worlds, right? You're a little bit in IT, because you're talking to them to get access to certain data sources and systems. You're in the business and meetings there to talk about what's going on. And you might have data lined into somewhere else in the organization that may be analytics related, possibly, especially if you're dependent on certain tools and technologies that get deployed to the organization, or the contract for that is paid for by IT, but you're a business person. And so there's a relationship there. Those people want to understand what's going on. Why are we even spending this money on these things? Can't you just get your job done in Excel? It's free, et cetera. So that's a leadership thing for sure. And companies that do it well, probably do very well. I mean, McKinsey probably does studies on these things, and yep, companies that figure that out, those are the ones that are killing it. Those that aren't,
so the key part of decision making is actually not just decision making on a day-to-day, but strategically and organizationally. How do you bring in the right talent? How do you structure that talent? How do you empower that talent to go and explore these things, right? So look, let's try and we've talked about a few different things, and I want to try and sort of weave a thread back together. Look, so decision making is fundamental to businesses, and all levels, micro to macro to strategic. And perhaps one of the most important role of decision making is actually how you adopt AI, not just how you use AI, right? With a cultural part of it. I don't know if we're going to talk in one of these episodes about the culture around the organizations. That's important. The other thing, we talked a little bit about is the role that tools can play in empowering organizations, right? So there's a mismatch between the business savvy analyst who understands the business domain and understand the implications and strategy, versus the tools that are largely programming based. Or even if you've got new Gen AI tools, there's a lack of confidence and trust element of it. And of course, they're going to get better. But in the meanwhile, what do you do for an organization, right? So there's a sort of a few different elements here. What did I miss, Gib? What do you think we should cover?
I think among the takeaways from this discussion, I think earlier you said something along the lines of, let your technology selection, your technology choices, and your potentially your consulting services choices be led by the strategy and the objectives and the assessment of your situation. Don't do it the other way, where you basically are a wide-eyed sort of like, I don't know what to do, and then go talk to a technology company or a consulting company and say, tell me what to do in this space, guide me down that path, because that's not the way to do it, because that's the way that leads to failure most times. I can't imagine it leads to success. The vendors who I worked for my entire career, would love to say otherwise, but that's the reality, right? I mean, there's biases in every conversation. Everyone has a bias in their conversation, but I think that's something that to leave the audience with is definitely understand your skills, resources, the history of things as well, and how things have evolved, and even do a checkpoint on sort of like how is our business today even supported with technology architecturally? Have we even documented it? Do we have somebody in charge of that, or is it sort of just distributed and we have no clue really? And so if someone had to audit the entire environment, like, we couldn't do it, or it would take a year. It'd be ridiculous and it wouldn't be realistic. It's sort of like we need to understand that before we go do this, because the generative AI thing, as you had pointed out, it's very data intense, and it's very computationally intense, which just means that it requires a lot of work the more complex you do things. And if you're lucky to start getting success on pilots, then you're going to want to do ever more advanced things. And then you really need to get into the mix, because the other thing we didn't talk about, which we can probably talk about some other time, is just how the pace of development every week. It's sort of like the next thing is coming out. I get alerts all the time about OpenAI. The next thing is coming out, and it's like the pace is so great. And business loves to have things steady state. Let's just execute this quarter, and then let's see what happens. In the very near future, if not already, it's almost totally insufficient. Sort of like you have to, whether it's your chief data officer or individuals you designate, you have to become a student of what's happening now, because it's not like in the past where sort of like, oh, there's a new BI tool that's came out that I can do some reporting, and I can do some cool data visualizations, and that sort of evolves at a ploddingly slow pace, and it's technology driven. But like this whole AI thing is just so quickly evolving, and it just illustrates that this the future is about experimentation and really embracing that, but doing it with as many risk controls as possible, so that you can minimize your mistakes.
And just on that, because the rate at which technology is evolving so quickly, you cannot make a business strategy decision based on technology. Your business strategy has to inform the selection. And more importantly, your operations and your systems and processes need to be established in upfront in a way that supports fast experimentation, swapping out ideas and concepts. One day it's OpenAI, next day it's Meta's Llama, right? So is your infrastructure ready and set up to just swap it out within a couple of minutes, as opposed to, oh no, we've got to spend the next 6 months making that transition. By the time that's done, it's too late. I was talking to someone who works in healthcare
Right.
recently, and one of the biggest challenges they said is every 3 years they decide they want to move to a new platform, and they have a team just engineering and coding everything up to make it work, and then they go, oh no, this platform's not good enough. And so this processes, methodologies in the organization, how we operate, have to
Yeah.
work backwards from understanding the constraints of how quickly the world is changing, but also how important these decisions need to be for the organization.
Yeah.
What does
Decision
it
making.
mean? Mhm.
Decision making as a construct for all sorts of different things is going to take on heightened importance. And if for no other reason than for your own career, security and career development, it's going to behoove everyone to really become a student of these things, because you don't want it to be displaced by some sort of automated system that answers 90% of what you do. Because that's often joked about, bandied about today, that AI won't replace human beings. I don't believe it will. That we talked about collective intelligence and the like, where humans and systems working together will outperform systems alone that are intelligent. I do believe that that's the case, but there are going to be lots of things on the margins that start to accelerate in terms of being able to do a lot of things that people are paid to do today. And so people have to start thinking about, how am I going to contribute and complement and add value in this environment? And that's going to be an interesting topic to talk about at some point.
And that might be one of the next episodes we're going to talk about. So, but thank you very much, Gib, for joining me today. And we're going to say goodbye to our audience today. And we'll come back to the next episode. See you soon.
Thank you.